Welcome back to another web design tutorial where I show you how to create responsive websites using HTML and CSS and, when necessary, JavaScript. In our video today, we're going to create a basic mobile slide-in menu. Now, I've created a basic header, and that is in a previous video, and so you can go back and look at that to see how I've created this responsive header that changes whenever you get to a certain breakpoint. Now in this project, 550 pixels, you can see down here, 550 pixels is where it breaks, and you have your links here, but at anything smaller than that we have this hamburger button. You can use anything you want. You could use the three dots or some other icon. The hamburger button, to me, is sufficient and a good enough pattern that most people know what that means. So I've essentially just copied the code, and then what we're going to do is we're going to actually create the menu that slides in on mobile devices that goes with this trigger. So we built a trigger, and then when we click that trigger, nothing happens now, but what we want is a menu to slide in, take up about half of the space, or maybe 3/4, and then we want to be able to close that slide-in menu. We also want to be able to click outside of the slide-in menu in order to make that close. And also I'm going to add in the ability to click on one of the links in the menu, and then it does the same thing where it closes the menu and or takes you to a new page. It's not completely necessary unless you're building some sort of one-page app or something like that. Like if you're doing a page refresh, you won't need to do that because it'll start out just like this. So it's not necessary, but if you're doing a one-page landing page, or if you have a single page web app, that sort of thing is necessary because you're not going to reload the page. So we have our HTML here. This is the HTML for our header, and now we just need to make out our menu. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, I'm going to call it an aside, and we're just going to call it menu, and we're going to do a menu enter. May not be completely necessary, but I do like to have that option if I want to center the menu or move it around in any ways in the container. And then inside that, I'm going to have an unordered list, and it's going to be called, I'll give it a name. I'll say menu pages, and then each of these list items is going to be a menu page link, and then inside of the list item I'm just going to have just an anchor link with a dead link, and we'll just call each of them whatever you would see commonly in a menu. So about, maybe services, and portfolio. Maybe I'm just making stuff up. This might be what you would have on a generic site, and then contact page. So we have 4 pages: the about page, the services, the portfolio, and the contact. And this is going to be almost everything. So let's go and take one more element, and that's going to be called the menu close. We need just like we have a trigger to open the menu, we need a trigger to close the menu. And as I showed you in the previous video, I'm using something called the Material Design Iconic font, and they have something called the close button. You can see there are a couple different, there's a close with a circle, there's a close with an open circle, so you can just kind of make your choice about what you want to do. So I'm just going to do a simple X, and the way you add that in is you add it in like that. And what I'm going to do right now, this is not a link. I could make it look like a link and behave like a link, but I'll just go ahead and create it as an anchor link like this, and just put that in there. So now we have a functioning link here. Okay, so I don't have to do anything extra to make it look like a link when you hover over it. So these are the basic parts of our of our slide-in menu, and now we need to move into the CSS. So I'm going to come down here into my CSS, and I'm just going to say slide in menu. Now I have an outer wrapper. Right now that outer wrapper is outside this, probably right here. It's called menu, so .menu, and then we'll be able to see it if I give it a little background color. So you can see that it's full width, and it takes up just the amount of space of our content. And what I want to do is I want to make that a width of 50 viewport width units. So it takes up whatever the viewport width is, it takes up 50 of those. Okay, you see that? And it's essentially like a 50%, but it's 50% of the viewport itself, not 50% of the container that it's in, which is a key difference and a little bit subtle, but something that you definitely should know. Okay, so if you don't know about viewport width and viewport height, you should definitely look into those things. And so let's get, we want the height of this to be 100. Viewport height units. Okay. So now you see what's happening here is what I want to do is float over the top of everything, but what it's doing is that it's inlining the HTML. So this is coming first, and then it's putting this down here, and it's all relative to each other and to the page. So what I want to do is I want to pull this out of the flow of the page, and I want to just kind of tack it over here. So the way that we do that is we call it position fixed, and then we give it a top edge of 0, and then I'm going to just leave the left edge 0. And what this does is it fixes it to the top of the viewport at this top 0 and left 0, so the top left hand corner. You could change that to the right if you wanted to, and it would move it over to the right. You can see how that works. I'm just going to say, for the sake of showing you some other things, I'm going to say left of 0, and then I'm going to work with you on translating some things. So this is a property we're going to have to work with, so I want to just kind of show you what it is. And it's called the transform property, and there's lots of different kind of sub-properties that you can use within this. I don't know what the appropriate term is. Methods. It's kind of like a method in JavaScript. You write it that way. So what I want to do is translate. I want to move this object, the menu object, on the x-axis, and then this is my value of how far I want to move it. So essentially I just want to move it 50 viewport widths, and you see that it moves that object in the space half of the viewport width. Okay, so it's taking up half and it's moved over half. Okay, if we did minus 50, it would actually move it off the page over here, half the viewport width. So we just want to translate it and push it 50 viewport widths to the right. So that's where we are right now. And this is our menu. Let's move on to the menu close. Should be nice and easy. It's a block level element. So what we want to do is I want to push the menu close over to the right hand side over here. So the menu close will just be text aligned to the right, and then I'm going to give it a little padding of 1 rem. And then because the menu close is a paragraph element, there's some padding already built into that, or some margin already built into that. So I'm just going to get rid of that margin so that I get a truer sense of 1 rem of padding. So now it has a true 1 rem, but before it had 1 rem plus whatever the margin was. on that element. So I like to just kind of clear that out so that I can work with a little bit more true values. Let's work on the menu now. So the menu is just an unordered list of list items. So our menu has a name. It's called menu pages. So we can just take that name and copy it, and we can put it down here and say menu pages. The list style is none, so that'll get rid of the bullets. And you can see that there's still a little bit of padding over here. It's more than I really want. What I want is no padding on the top or the bottom, and I want one rim of padding on the edges. Okay, so there's no padding up here. Any space between these elements is being created by this X. Okay, and then let's put a little space between the list items. So we'll say the margin between them is going to be one rim, and so that gives us space on the outside and the left and right margins as well. So let's set that to 0 and get it back where we want it. I'm going to make those a little bit larger so that they're just a little bit more prominent. And then the list items have an anchor tag inside of it, and so I'm just going to get rid of the text decoration, which is the underline, and say it's none. So that should get rid of the underline here, but when I hover over it, I do want that to come back. Okay, so we'll just copy that, and in SAS what you do is you say and hover, sorry, let's try again, and hover, and then that's like saying a hover. Okay, so anytime you indent underneath, you can do pseudo elements, and you just have to write the ampersand, and then that gives you it's like saying whatever was above it and then whatever the pseudo element is. So we want the text decoration to be underlined. So now whenever we hover over it, we get an underline. Okay, so that's not completely necessary, but a little bit helpful for me. The menu close, I want to match the font size, so I want to also give that a 2 rem. So we make that menu close item, that A link, we make it 2 rem also. You could add some hover effects to that if you wanted to. I'm not going to worry about that right now. It looks exactly like I want it to, and what we want is for this to slide in. Okay, so we need to begin creating that slide in feature. We're going to do that using a special class called slide in, and we're going to call that through a JavaScript event. So let's come to the menu, because that's where we're going to attach this slide in. I'm just going to call it slide in, and I'm going to use a little bit of, it's not CSS hacking, but it's just one way of creating animation on the web, especially if you have something going from one place to another place, or one property value to another property value. And at this point we want to we actually want to translate our menu to 100. I was doing 50 just so that you could see it, but right now it's 100% of the viewport width, or 100 viewport width units. So it's right here at the edge of the, just off the edge, but it's 100 viewport widths that way. So what we want to do is we want to bring it back 50 viewport widths. Okay, so let's do transform. We want to translate it X, and we want it to be we want it to come in 50 viewport widths. I think that's going to work. The way you can test it is you can take the class that you want to, and you can manually put it onto the place that you want it to go. Let's see. Yeah. So it takes it from 100 viewport widths to the right, and then instead when you add this class, it changes it from 100 to 50, so it has the effect of bringing it back 50 viewport widths. So it's a little bit I don't know, might feel a little janky to you, but this is a way that you can do it completely in CSS. There are probably other ways, so if you have another way that you can think about doing this, please put it in the comments and share it with everybody, or make a video and share it with everybody. That way they can know that there are multiple ways to do this, but this is typically how I do just kind of a simple slide-in menu like this. So you transform it all the way off the screen, and then you translate it back. Okay, so you translate it off, and you translate it back, and that's going to happen when we add this class to this container. So we know that that works, and now we just need to do the JavaScript that when we click this, so right now we're clicking and nothing is happening, so we need to attach that click event to adding slide in to this container. So that's what we're going to do down here. Let's just say menu slide in, and then what we're going to do is we're going to look at the menu trigger. So that's what we called this trigger up at the top. So that's this menu trigger right here, and whenever we click on, so on click, we're going to run a function, and that function is going to be to add slide in to the menu container. So we take, kind of think about it backwards, the dot menu container, we're going to add a class of slide in to the menu container, and then that should actually bring our menu into view. Okay, so it does it, but you see how quickly it goes. It goes very quickly, and it's not animated. It's just moving it from 100 viewport widths back to 50. That's all it's doing. But we can create a little animation. So if you're looking for like just a one point to another point quick animation, we can use on the container that's being changed, we say transition. Sorry. We say transition, and then we choose what property do we want to transition, and then how many milliseconds or how many seconds do you want it to take, and then what sort of animation do you want it to be. So I'll go through that with you. At this point, I think I'll just say all. It's bad practice typically to say all, but I'm just going to make sure that it works, because the problem is that this is now listening for all of the possible changes. So if you are just transitioning a color or a width or a height or something like that, you want to only put that property, that one property here. But I'm just going to say all right now. It's more performant to choose the actual property. That's what I'm saying. And then we'll say 300 milliseconds, so it's 1/3 of a second. And then we're going to use, I like to just use ease. You could use ease in, you could use ease in out, or you could just use ease out, or you can actually, if you go, there are any number of tools, including Google Chrome, where you can look at a website and you can actually create your own unique animation or transition. So at this point, I'm just going to say ease, which is a keyword for ease in and ease out. So it's going to ease into the screen smoothly, and it's going to ease out. You could also use something called linear. A linear means it moves from one place to the other in the same motion. So if you were running, like you started running and you hit your top speed from your first step, and then when you stop, you just completely stop. But that's not the way that we run, so it's not a very realistic or smooth animation. A more smooth animation would be, you take your first step and you're not at top speed, but when you get to the middle, you are, and then when you try to slow down, you want to stop somewhere at a specific end, you begin to slow down and then you stop. Okay, so that's what ease in and out. So you ease in, you start slow, and you finish slow, and then in the middle, you should reach your top speed. So that's a quick little animation primer. If you watch the Dev Tips for Designers channel on YouTube with Travis Nielsen, he has a really great like 3 or 4 part series on different styles and types of animation in CSS. I would highly recommend that you go there. It was one of the places where I went to learn CSS animations, and they're just little small things that you can add into your website that just give it a little bit more style. They give it a little bit more professionalism, a little bit more class, and they're definitely well worth learning how to do. And transition is one of those animation types. So I'm just going to go with everything 300 milliseconds and ease. So any changes that are made here with the width, the height, the position, the transform, all of these things, the background color, all these things are going to be changed with a 300 millisecond animation, so from one to the other. So that's what we want to do. When we add slide in, we want it to animate, and it'll take 300 milliseconds for this to slide in. If you want something slower or faster, you can just manipulate this. So a smaller number goes faster, a higher number goes slower. And then for every 1,000 milliseconds, that is 1 second. Okay, so milli is 1,000, and so it's 1,000 milliseconds, that's 1 second. Alright, so let's stick with 300, and then we need to write, I think that's good. Let's check it out. And I want to look at this as we would see it here. So let's get up our mobile styles here. So when we click on this, it should slide in to place. Okay, and so it does. So you can see we have a trigger, and then we have a slide in. Okay, maybe that's too fast for you. Like I said, if it's too fast for you, you just need to change this number here to something larger. Maybe 600 is better for you, or whatever you want to create. Fast is modern. Slower is going to be kind of classier, and so just little things to think about. But it does work. And now what happens is we get stuck out here, and what we want is to be able to click this and have this move back. So what we can do is we can essentially just reverse this. So we copy it, and we say not the menu trigger, but the menu close. Remember, we named that we named this close button menu close. So we're going to use that to target the X, and then instead of adding the class of slide in, we just want to remove it. And it's that easy. You do need 2 separate functions for that, or at least I'm going to use 2 separate functions. So when we click this, it should close. It's very fast. There we go. So now you have a proper slide in menu. Okay, now what about if people click over here? Okay, a lot of times if you click outside, you'll see the menu slide off. So what we need to do for that is, I like to use an overlay or an underlay method. And the way you do that is you come and you create a new div, and I'm just going to call it overlay. And then we need to style that div. So let's come down. And what we want is a semi-transparent layer that sits over the top of the normal content, but sits underneath. So like a sandwich, it's over the top of the normal content, and it's under, like it's tucked under this menu, and this menu is at the very top layer. So what we want to do is we want to say overlay. We're going to call it position fixed, because we just need it to cover everything. And so top 0, left 0, and when it's a fixed position or absolute position and you start moving it around the page, you have to declare a width. So it does not have its own automatic width. So we're going to say width of 100%, and a height of 100%. So that means it's going to take up all of the width of the body or the viewport, and it's going to take up all the height of the viewport. I want to make the background color on this semi-transparent. So for that we have to use this RGBA function. This is how you would write it in SAS. You could also write it a little bit differently. If you want to learn how to do transparent background colors, you could look that up and figure out how to do it, but this is how you can do it in SAS. So I'll just use a simple black, and then I will say 0.5. Okay, so now you see that there's a dark layer over the top of everything. So if I change this to 0.2, 0.1, 0.9 is almost everything. Okay, so we're just changing the transparency. So you say RGB, that's the color, and then A is for the alpha channel, and then we have in parentheses our color. This could be a hash, so it could be any color that you want, and then a comma, and then you have anywhere from 1 is the complete color, so there's no transparency, and 0 is no color at all, and then in between that are your steps. So 0.5 is 50% transparency. So if you are familiar with graphic design or you know, designing any sort of thing in Illustrator or Photoshop, and you do a transparency, that's essentially what we're doing. This is 50%. But it's on top of everything, which is not what we want. So what we want is it to be on top of this layer, but under our menu layer. So what we do is we come back to our menu, and we can force our menu to the top by using what's called the z-index property. Now z-index controls the vertical index of each of the different elements on your website, and I can just make it something really big like 100. If you have a lot of stacked elements in your website, you might have to make it 1,000 or 9,000. Sometimes you see 9,999. So it's whatever you want to make it. Just make sure that it's more than 1, because 1 is the initial layer that everything is painted on. And then I'm going to go ahead and add a layer to the overlay as well, because we're doing a simple example here. But if you were to add other parts to the HTML and you wanted to add more HTML, then it would essentially just be in between those layers, and you wouldn't have to worry about actually moving it in the HTML. Because right now it's sitting on top of all this because it's coming last in the HTML, not because I've declared what position I want it to be in. So I'll go down and I do a z-index on this, and I want it to be somewhere between 100 and 1. So I'll just say 50. So now we have everything in proper alignment here. Our overlay is there, and what I want to do, you can see that it's not working properly because I don't want the overlay to be there all the time. I only want it to be there when I click on the menu trigger, which, because it's higher in the stack than the regular content, it's not even allowing me to click on the menu trigger. Okay, so what I want to do is, I already have a hide class, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add that hide class to the overlay, and that should hide it. That should give it a display none, and I only want it to show up when I want it to show up, and that's when I click the trigger. So we come up to our menu trigger. So when we click on the menu trigger, we add the class of slide into the menu, but we also add or remove the class of hide from the overlay layer. So we're just going to remove the class of hide from that layer every time that we click this trigger, and now you see that this slides in. We get our overlay, and then, you know, it still doesn't work properly because when we close it, our overlay needs to go away. So instead of totally rewriting this, let's just go down here and we'll say we're going to add the class of hide whenever we click the menu close. Okay, so now we click menu trigger, which is essentially the opening, the menu, then we get an overlay, and it highlights essentially this menu, and then when we click it, it takes everything away. What I also want to do, which is a nice little something that most websites have that have a mobile menu like this, is when you click outside of the menu, then everything goes away too. And if we want to do that, because we want these two things to happen when we click outside on the overlay, and because the overlay is an actual thing, we can add the overlay here, and then so whether we click menu close or overlay, on the click it's going to do the same thing. So if we click on the X, it goes away. If we click on the menu overlay, it goes away as well. Okay, and then I'm going to add a third thing, which is if you click on one of these links here, nothing happens at this point. But I want it to, like when I go, let's say this is a one-page website and the about section is down, you know, somewhere at a lower part of the page. When I click this, I want to be able to go down to that section, but I don't want this to stay here. So right now if I click that and it was linked to another part of the page, it would go down to that section, but this would all be there. And the user would have to click the X again to get out of the menu. But I want them to be able to open the menu, click on services, all this stuff closes, and you find yourself down at the services section. This will be for one-page web apps or for one-page landing pages. So the way we do that is we just call our, what do we call them? We call them a menu page link. Okay, so when we click on a menu page link, we also want to do the same thing as when there's a close or an overlay. So we can just chain them together like this, making sure that you put the class delimiter there of the dot, and then all these functions, whichever of these functions that we do, it's going to run this function inside. So when we click on about, everything goes away, and theoretically you would scroll to a different section of the web page. If we click the X, it all goes away, and if we click on overlay, then it all goes away. So that is the essentials of our slide in menu. Now you can make that slide in from the left or the right or top or bottom or however you want it to come in. You would just need to change this translate. So translating Y, sorry, it has to be a capital. So translating Y would give you the effect of going up and down. Okay, so it's a little bit different. So you see how this is translated to the y-axis, the vertical axis. So you have to fiddle around with the numbers a little bit to get it to work on the y-axis, but it's I've done those sorts of menus before too. So one last thing, when I get to this point, when I get to the 550 pixels, it's still going to make a menu out here even though I don't need the menu. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that this menu is hidden or display none whenever the viewport gets outside of when I'm going to use it. That way the website doesn't create the menu and it's just kind of sitting out there, or something funky happens and it shows up on the page and it's not supposed to. So I just say media, at media, at a minimum width of 550 pixels, I want the menu to be display none. Okay, so it won't create the menu once I'm, when those links are showing. It'll only, the menu will only be there whenever I need it, which is now at 550 pixels or less. Okay, hopefully that's pretty clear. It's not a lot of JavaScript. It's mostly just adding and removing some classes, and then we're using those. We're using some CSS animation here in order to be able to move that fixed position element the menu element forward and backwards. You could certainly have this to be 100 if you wanted to, and then you would just need to come down and change this to 100 so that it takes up the full part of the website. Nope. Let's see. Trying to ad lib here. Maybe that's not right. Oh, there it goes. I think it just messed up on me. Let's save it and try it again. We need to bring it back to 0. There it goes. Okay. So you can make it a full width like this. I'm just choosing to make it half with the 50 viewport widths. So, nope, one too many. So hopefully that teaches you something new, something that you can use on any sort of web project. This is just kind of a simple, basic little responsive slide-in menu. You can use these for anything. You can trigger them with anything. It doesn't have to be, the classic, hamburger menu. You could trigger that with any sort of trigger and use that to bring it onto the page. If you have any comments or questions, please leave them down in the comments section below. And you can also ask me on Twitter. I'm at Brian Hafferkamp, and my first name is spelled with an I, Brian with an I. And I'll also put a link to this code into the information or the description of the video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.